Hey guys, I am back and I'm going to make over an old recipe. The recipe that I'm making over is from this classic cookbook that all of our moms had. Well, anybody who's my age, our moms all had one of these cookbooks. And this is the Betty Crocker cookbook. And as you can probably tell, Betty Crocker has been quite successful because she's got her own line of kitchen tools and stuff like that. So yeah, and the recipe that I'm going to be working off of is called chicken paprika. The recipe itself is pretty simple. We're going to make a few tweaks to it. The original recipe calls for flour and it calls for onions. And those are really the only two things that I'm going to omit from this recipe. And the reason I'm omitting the flour was just to dredge the chicken in to make it crispy. I'm actually just gonna do the seasonings and you'll see in a minute. The other thing is the onions. Because I can't have onions, I'm gonna leave them out. You could add, it calls for 2 medium onions finely chopped, about 1 cup. That's gonna be a lot of carbs. If you really want to use onion, I would suggest you use a 1/4 cup of finely chopped onions. And when they call finely chopped, I mean like finely chopped. My mom used to do it all the time and it's time consuming. But again, I'm leaving the onion out because of my allergies. If you want that onion flavor, you could use onion powder. So the ingredients that it calls for is 2.5 to 3 pounds of chicken. Let me go grab my chicken and I'll be right back. All right, so I am back with my chicken. These are chicken thighs. If you watched my video on making chicken crisps, this is the thighs that I skinned to make the crisps. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring a bowl over because we're gonna do it a little bit different than the recipe. So first of all, this is about, I think it's just right at 3 pounds, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 chicken thighs. So let me point the camera down even more so that you can see what I'm going to be doing. Okay, so I put the 8 chicken thighs in a bowl, and what I tried to do is not put any on top of each other because the original recipe calls for flour, paprika, and salt. So what I'm going to do, it calls for 1 teaspoon of paprika here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and get 1 teaspoon of paprika, but I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna carefully try to get a little bit on all of them. And that's good. Right now I've only used about half of that teaspoon. So now what I'm gonna do is it calls for half a teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the salt. Use about half of it. With the salt, you can be a little more liberal just because it's salt, and we know salt is not a bad thing on a ketogenic diet. But, you know, again, there's about half of it. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my tongs and I'm gonna flip it over. I know you guys are disappointed I'm not using my hands like I always do, but I'm just not going to today. So we're gonna just flip all these over. Maybe. I don't know where all my tongs have gone to. I think my husband has hidden them in his grill cupboard that we have in a different area, and I just haven't gone to look. All right, so I've flipped them all over. I'm going to take the other half of the paprika and sprinkle that on. And then I'm going to take the other half of the salt and sprinkle that on. And then I'm going to take my tongs I'm gonna just kind of stir them up a little bit to see if we can get it a little more mixed in and not just in certain areas. All right, so basically that's all we're gonna do with this. Again, this would have been dredged in flour, but we're not going to do that. So makes it a little bit quicker too. All right, so the next thing that the recipe calls for is 1/4 cup of shortening. If you don't know what shortening is, it's like Crisco. So some acceptable subs for shortening would be butter, oil, lard. You could use shortening, but I don't think it's really a great healthy fat. You could use avocado oil, you could use olive oil, you could use bacon grease. Bacon grease would be great in this recipe. You just want something that's going to be a medium to high temperature oil because we're gonna kind of fry this chicken a little bit. So I have over here already heated up my cast iron skillet. All right, there we go. And I'm just gonna take half a stick or 4 tablespoons of butter. We're just gonna go ahead and let that melt a little bit. I was working on this video and my neighbor came over, and so I was talking to him, and I did have this heated up with a little bit of oil in it, and yeah, it got a little overheated because I was talking to him too long. So I had to turn it off, and it's kind of cooled down a little bit, but we're almost, we've got this stick about half melted. I have it on a setting of 7. This says to cook in a large skillet and cook the chicken in shortening over medium heat 15 to 20 minutes or until light brown. So that's what we're gonna do here. As you can probably tell, my stove is not level. That's okay though, it doesn't have to be. So we're gonna go ahead and finish this up and let this melt for a minute. As you can tell, it's starting to get nice and bubbly, so that'll make a really good base to fry this in. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm actually gonna put these meat side down. This would be the skin side and this is the bone side. I'm just gonna go ahead and put these skin side down. Now, I'm using skinned, but you can use thighs with skin. This originally calls for 2.5 to 3 pounds of broiler fryer chicken cut up. So, what is a broiler fryer chicken? Basically, any chicken. You're going to want, on a keto diet, you're gonna wanna make sure that this chicken is more thighs and legs than it is breasts. So that's why I chose to use this for my recipe. But really anything with a bone in it is gonna be a broiler fryer. So I'm putting all of these in here. I'm kind of packing them in really well. We're gonna go ahead and let them cook for a little bit. Get nice and golden brown. I'm gonna let it cook for about 5 minutes, and I actually have this great lid that I have left over from a pan that I no longer have, or I think I know which pan this goes to, and I only use it every once in a while. It's a big pasta stock pot, and so I will use it to brine chicken in. But the rest of the time, I use my lid because it's nice and flat, and it fits very well over my skillet. So I'm gonna go ahead and let that cook for the next 10 minutes. I'm gonna flip it, and I'm gonna let it cook for about 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, I've been cooking these for about 10 minutes. I actually set a timer. So let's see what they look like. Nice and golden brown. Now they're not gonna be as crispy as they would be had they had their skin still on them, but the browning effect is still gonna be there. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna actually leave the lid off now and let them cook for another 10 minutes and see how they look at that point. Then we'll go ahead and continue with the rest of the recipe. All right, it's been about 5 minutes since the last update. So I am going to go ahead and continue on with the rest of the recipe. Just so you know, I have washed these with soap, so I am using the same tongs, but they are good and clean. So the next part of the recipe says go ahead and remove this chicken to another bowl. So I'm going to do that now. It's very spitting. I'm going to actually turn this down a little bit for right now. Cast iron is not like regular, so it's probably not going to help me very much that I've turned it down, but there we go. Okay, so we're going to remove this over to here, and I don't know if you can see all these good scrapings in the bottom of the pan, but I'm just going to go ahead and loosen them a little bit. This is going to add really good flavor to the rest of the recipe, so we're going to go ahead and leave it in, or else I would definitely pull that out and eat it, because doesn't that look good? Okay, so the next part of the recipe says to go ahead and add your onions. Again, I'm not going to add the onions, so I'm going to skip that. The next ingredient is 1 can 10 ounces of tomato puree. I am not going to use tomato puree. Just because of my allergies, but what I am going to do is I have some spaghetti sauce of mine that I just took out of the freezer, and I'm going to actually put a cup of spaghetti sauce in here. And then it also says to add 1 tablespoon of paprika. 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons, and my tablespoon is dirty right now, so I'm going to use teaspoons, 1, 2, and 3, which is pretty much the rest of this jar. So there we go with that. And it also calls for another teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I am going to use my tongs again to stir that all together. My daughter came in and she went, "Whoa, is that dinner?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh man, it looks amazing already." I said, "Just wait." All right. So now that that's all stirred together, I'm going to add the chicken back. And again, I'm going to personally, my thought is to go ahead and put that skin side down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And then we're going to let it simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes. And when it comes back, I will when we come back, I will show you the finishing step to this, which makes it oh so amazing. And then we'll plate it. So look at all that good juice in there still. I'm gonna go ahead and just dump that over the top. All right, there we go. It says to cover tightly and simmer for 30 to 45 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and set my timer for 30 minutes because I think that is all it's gonna need. I'm gonna leave it on 4. 4 seems to be a good temperature right now, and I'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, I'm back, and I am going to finish up our chicken paprika. So let me go ahead and turn this down so you can see my skillet. All right. Now, about 5 minutes or so ago, I went ahead and I flipped them. It smelled to me like the tomatoes were caramelizing a little bit, or burning. And as you can see, there is a little dark on the chicken. So I went ahead and sorry, I'm playing with my timer over here. I don't know. There we go. Okay, so the next part of the recipe is going to be we remove the chicken from the pan. Like I said, I was seeing that it was getting a little, or I smelled that it was getting a little burnt. So I went ahead and I flipped them. I'm really glad that I did because I think that the bottom turned out really well too. Okay, so go ahead and remember to keep that in mind. If it smells like it's getting overcooked, it probably is. Okay, so there's my chicken paprika. Doesn't that look amazing? Okay, so the final step of this recipe is to take half a cup of sour cream. I use the Great Value sour cream. I find it has very few ingredients. I like the flavor of it. I use Daisy as my preferred, but when this is only $1.87 for a nice big container of it versus $2 or $3, I go ahead and do that. Now the last part of the recipe is to take the pan, whatever's left in the pan, and you add half a cup of sour cream to it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Get up all those good, those little burnt bits that are on the bottom of the pan. And as you can see, it makes a really nice gravy. And then we're going to let that set for a little bit so that all of that can incorporate. Now I will tell you that when I saw or I smelled that it was getting a little overcooked, I went ahead and I turned my heat down to 1. Okay, now the rest of the recipe says to go ahead and mix in the sour cream and then take your piece of chicken. I'm going to take this really nice big piece of chicken and just spoon some of the sauce over the top. There you go. That is chicken paprika. Doesn't that look yummy? Now what I'm going to serve this with is going to be a salad, or you could serve it with loaded vegetables or green beans with bacon and butter, or you could serve it with veggies and dip. I mean, there's so many things that you could add to this to make it really a good full meal. But, you know, overall, this is a really good, healthy meal as far as keto is concerned. It does have some sour cream in it, so if you can't have dairy, I would just leave it out. I've done chicken paprika before for my daughter, and we just leave it out. You could probably use coconut oil, or excuse me, coconut milk in this instead. But yeah, there's plenty of options out there for dairy-free if you'd rather do it that way. I'm trying to limit my dairy this week, so this is the only dairy I've had today other than butter. So I hope you like my chicken paprika recipe, and we'll see you again real soon.